For those of you with RG 1625, 1631s, with the old Kohler 27 horse, when it gets a bit old and a bit smoky and you look at replacing it, you think you might like a few extra horsepower. Mine was the same, and I put this Chinese 1000cc 33 horse on it. It's a pretty standard motor. That's just the number from the people that sell it in Australia, Jono and Jono in Ballarat. It actually went on surprisingly well. The engine mounts on the outside stayed pretty much the same. I had to lengthen this one here a little bit to make the motor go back a bit further. And I had to cut a new slot in the engine plate for the inner one. It didn't quite match up. But that was fairly easy to do with an angle grinder, as you can see there. I had to cut the inner slot. It didn't quite match up to the Kohler. The PTO shaft was nearly identical. It was a little bit different on the inner land where the pulley for the hydraulic pump mates up against the inside. It had a little bit more radius than the Kohler had, which meant that it didn't quite sit in as far in as it should have to line up with the hydraulic pump. So I had to skim about 5mm off in the lathe, off the inside face of the pulley, so that it would go in a bit further, and then put a slightly thicker washer here, so that it'd all line up. That of course meant that this whole clutch and pulley assembly went over a little bit, but I was replacing the jack shaft anyway. So I just moved the whole pulley over a fraction and moved the timing belt pulley in a little bit. Now I got rid of those horrible American QD taper locks at the same time and put the good old Pommy taper locks in, which I think work a lot better and they're a lot easier to come off. So I replaced all them taper locks on both sides and on that pulley there as well. I replaced the pulleys just with standard 14M pulleys. There was no great drama. I'll put the sizes on if anyone's terribly interested. Other than that, the wiring is a lot simpler. Just needs a couple of earths and a power supply. Power supply for the starter motor. Around here. It just goes in there, nothing special there. That's a power supply for the clutch. It just comes off the starter motor terminal. And that's about it. I didn't wire in the hour meter. I think that lead here is for the hour meter. This little one here, the white one. Didn't wire that in. I don't really care that much. Now the only problem I had with the whole installation, it all ran perfectly until it stopped running, and it kept cutting out every now and then. Every hour or two, it'd just die, and the only way you could keep it running was to keep pulling the clutch out, which to me said fuel starvation. And I had noticed that I had used the old Kohler filter. I hadn't changed it, and that had broken inside, and I thought, oh, maybe some bits have gone into the pump and into the little impulse pump and maybe damaged the diaphragm. So I replaced the pump, and it didn't help at all. So I did a little bit more investigation, and Kohler eventually admitted on one of their YouTube channels that these pumps will only draw about 18 inches, or about 450mm. They'll only lift that high, and the standard 1625 fuel tank is down at about 700, especially when it's nearly when it's getting down and it hasn't got quite the weight of petrol in it. So sure enough, the pump wouldn't draw, and it'd run out of fuel and die. And of course, by the time I could get round to pulling all the pipes off, um, it had refilled itself, just siphoning down out of the pump and refilled all the lines, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was until I figured that out. So in the end, all I am looking around for you do need a very low pressure pump, 1 to 2 psi. Your normal low pressure pumps are about 4 to 6, and that might overpower the carburetor and start forcing fuel into the crankcase, which you really don't want. It dilutes the oil and could wreck the motor. So while I'm finding a 1 to 2 psi pump, electric pump, and use the original tank, I've just mounted a small tank there, just so it's up a bit higher, and that's working perfectly. Other than that, your 33 horse works a treat. I mean, I've got no complaints about the Kohler for the age. It was in surprisingly good condition. I think maybe the valves were leaking a bit. The actual cylinders themselves didn't really seem to have a hell of a lot of wear. They were still within margin, and um, they weren't tapered out or terribly worn. There was no great lips or scarring on the cylinders. I was really surprised. Probably a 15-year-old motor that's done God knows how many hours. Clutch, I think, is still original, still working fine. Again, when the day comes to replace that, I think I'll just get rid of the clutch and just go straight B-belts and figure out some other way of having a clutch. Still got the original 3 A belts on, they're Opti belts, and I don't know whether they're better in quality, but they hang on, they squeal occasionally, but I really don't mind. They're allowed to squeal. Other than that, it runs fine. This here is where I left the jack shaft. I left it a little bit long in case I wanted to put a triple pulley on. And I left it that long that it rubbed up against the casing and gave me a nice little burn mark before I realised it. Other than that, I mean, the motor was 2,600 Australian. You can get them out of China for about 860 US, which is just a little bit cheaper than the Kohler or Vanguard 33s or 35s. Anyway, quite happy with that, and it's been on there for about 4 months, and it's running fine. So, yep.